Growing up, the common assumption was that if you wanted to serve the interests of the poor, you voted left wing. If you wanted to serve the interests of the wealthy, you voted right wing. But since the Obama era, this class divide between left and right has been increasingly blurred. As the left increasingly dominates government and corporate institutions, we see more and more elites championing left wing causes, while blue collar people increasingly champion the right. But why is this phenomenon occurring? Wouldn't it serve the interests of the wealthy to vote Republican as they did in the past? What benefits might the privileged have for voting for the left? The following is a discussion we had over this peculiar trend. Anyway, so today we're discussing the topic of, well, basically it's a continuation of the topic we had last time, where we are talking about how society is slowly moving towards like a leftward shift, where things seem to be, especially on the left, things seem to be going completely derailed, and it seems like no one's really sure why that's happening.
Right. I guess we can add Zim for context. He sent me a video earlier today about how like old money tends to support the left, and it makes sense. So it's just a YouTube quote, but it makes sense to me. I'm not gonna fact check this, but someone put, if you want to get wealthy, then you vote Republican, but if you want to stay wealthy, then you vote Democrat. Kind of like
Yeah,
a gatekeepy. It's kind of fucked up, but like if you just remove the morality and emotional aspect of it, it seems like the most logical uh move to preserve your wealth, to like
yeah,
not make it harder for potential challengers to like come in and like I don't know, potentially challenge your business or just have more competition in general.
yeah. There also seems to be like an element where it's like they want to create the impression that they're on the side of the poor
Yeah, I think
by,
that's
yeah,
social like signaling because social status is for I don't know how to quantify it, but it is value to some degree to being good with like the masses.
yeah. It kind of reminds me of Teddy Roosevelt, the president from like the progressive Republican president who was famous for regulating monopolies and excessive corporate power. And the idea was basically if the rich continue to allow the poor to get screwed over by corporations, then eventually the poor will start to move towards socialism. And then eventually they'll call for an overthrow of the capitalists. So it's within their own interest to take a few hits here and there. And in return, they still get to keep their business and keep their lives. They still get to be in power. They just have to give up a few extra dollars in return, which
Yeah,
they'll, and eventually, since they're rich, powerful corporations, they'll find a way to compensate for it.
right. Yeah, they have so many levers to like
Yeah.
like just if they really want that money or that loss back versus if you're just full on pure, because eventually you just if you're good enough, you just become a monopoly. You just keep your foot on the gas and eventually you'll get targeted, whether it's through jealousy or just like pure spite or jealousy of the people with the inequality. So that's smart of them to like be strategic about um their virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Um I was gonna say something. Yeah, like going back to what you said previously, like this republics are relatively a new idea, and it's hard to pinpoint who your rulers are if there's a bunch of them, versus if you're just in a dictatorship or a monarchy, it's pretty easy to single out someone if you
Yeah.
wanted to overthrow. So even in the system, like I think it's if you can break through the threshold and like join, I guess, like the upper middle class, and I guess you can reap the benefits of the system being selectively broken. Because then there's a lot of opportunity for you to like preserve it and multiply your wealth. But starting out is it does get shadier and shittier as time goes on, it looks like.
Yeah, but most people don't seem to really pick up on that. Like they know, like they might know to some degree that yeah, there's like corporate corruption among, say, the Democrats, but it's not to the extent that they would realize that it's an actual threat to them. An example of this would be like, for example, like you know how like you said earlier before, it's like if the bad guy is like a monarch or an aristocrat and everyone knows who he is, then they can take him out pretty quickly, like they did during the French Revolution. But if the bad guys are like hidden among the masses, among like the bourgeoisie, among the bureaucracy, then you don't really know who they are because they just seem like commoners, when in reality they have way more leverage than you do. Even the billionaires, it's like most of them are discreet these days. They don't want to be known.
Right, yeah. And like I mean at that level, like the trend of like stealth wealth or whatever, where they'll wear like seemingly very normal looking, normal people wear, but it's like a $500 t-shirt or something to like signal that they're actually part of like the 1% or the rich or whatever. Yeah, it's true. There's a lot of ways for really wealthy people to like hide their wealth and not be targeted. I think I think the issue has been going on for a while. I think like rich people will always be there with their power. I think it is tricky not finding someone to point out because I hear about like seemingly self-proclaimed communists in America like wanting to overthrow or like change the regime per se, but I don't see who they're targeting. They just want to dismantle everything. And I don't think they have I don't know, the strategy to actually take over a country. I think it's just something they're disgruntled with and they just have these radical feelings.
Yeah, the most that most of them can hope for is like they'll find a way to get into the system and become
Yeah, and
part
then
of the
just
system. And you see
they'll
that
help.
with like the Hassan Piker types.
Yeah, they'll just like get a payout. That's why like it bothers me because I think the truly ambitious people who do seek power, I think they'll just play the game and like do what's needed to seize it versus someone just upset over student loans or the cost of living.
Yeah. But the thing is, like most liberals, like they don't seem to be able to pick up on this because they're still stuck in this sort of 2004 mentality where they think it's just neocons and versus like liberals. You know, like they think that the rich are all Republicans. There's still this idea that, oh, well, most of the people who voted for Trump, they're all like upper middle class to upper class boomers. But if you look at the economic breakdown of the people who voted for Trump versus Biden, the Biden voters actually make more money than the Trump voters.
Yeah. And I read somewhere that back in the day, a lot of Trump's demographics would have probably voted Democrat back when they supported the unions and all that. And you mentioned before about how the Democrats kind of sold out to the working class people, or just most of their voter base.
Yeah,
They're
and
not
that's
who they were in the mid 2000s. I don't know, like I still don't know maybe we talked about before, but I don't know what made them switch where it's so drastic now. It's night and day difference with where they're at now as a party and then where they were in the early 2000s.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like recently, news just came out that the Teamster unions, they just did a poll with their union members, and what they found out was that the leaders of the unions still tend to prefer voting Democrat. They still advocate for like Democratic candidates, but then the regular membership, they overwhelmingly chose Trump over Kamala Harris. And
Mm.
that's just catching everyone by surprise. Keep in mind, Trump is openly like not friendly towards unions.
Yeah.
And yet even then it's like the regular union guys, they still prefer Trump over Harris. But the leadership is still Democrat. So there's a discrepancy between the lower members and the upper members.
Yeah, that's so weird.
And so like it's increasingly not even an economic issue anymore. Now it's just like a cultural issue. It's like, are you part of the cultural elite or you're part of the cultural poor?
Yeah, it's like a social hierarchy. It's not even just a economic class discrepancy, which
But
that's always existed too. Like
yeah,
there's plenty of really rich millionaire, I guess like blue collar grassroots type of demographics, and then there's probably well educated, just lower middle class and middle class. Uh, I guess you'd call them Democrats. So there's a lot of overlap, and I don't. I think social class matters more than people think, I guess. Like where your values lie versus like, oh, how much money, what tax bracket are you in? You know what I mean?
yeah, because I mean, like, if you look at Trump, like there's that famous joke about how like Trump likes his steaks well done with ketchup. It's like who that?
Yeah,
It's like what middle class person will admit to eating that?
yeah. I mean, I would. I like ketchup with my steak, but yeah, it just shows that like that's why I read somewhere too. Like I don't know, like maybe we can fact check this, but supposedly, Trump's donated to Kamal's. I don't know what it was, but I guess he just donated to her in the past. I just know for the longest time, Trump supported a lot of Democratic politicians, and this is way before. So I don't know, like him deciding to run for the Republican Party when I don't think there's anything telling him not to. I mean, he became president, but I just find that interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know what the lore is or the backstory because I haven't done any research on it, but I think yeah, just before that, before Trump decided to run for presidency, like so many rappers or just like pop culture in general, like loved him because he was, even though he's rich as hell, I think he's a good representation or a caricature of like a poor person like hitting the lottery and
yeah,
then just spending money extravagantly. And it's
yeah,
crazy because he's actually like that and it's not an act, which is even more bizarre because he came from wealth. You'd think he'd be more old money.
yeah. The thing is, like, when you look at most of the things that people post about Trump when they hate Trump, like, very little of it has anything to do with actual workings of policy. Like, they're not critiquing whether like a policy works or not. They're just critiquing, oh, well, that sounds absurd, or that sounds crazy, or that's a bad look. It's always about the external trappings of it. It's always about how would this make me look if I were to support this? Like, what would other people think of me? How would they judge me? Like, it's very Victorian, it's very judgmental.
Yeah, that's like very like in line with like, Asian saving face and all that. And just
Yeah,
like, if you have problems, you don't want to like I guess bother your family and like you wouldn't reach out for help. Or if like a family member is like shameful, you kind of keep it under wraps because you don't want to be judged or ostracized by your community. I think those type of people worry more about image. And I think that's why like Obama was so loved because like he was the first and last president I voted for. And he was so well spoken, like very calm, very well mannered. But then he like also like bombed the shit out of a bunch of countries. So
yeah,
and he
he,
deported a bunch of people. So it's like okay, like I can't overlook that either. But I think most people they casually just I hate to say it, just vote based on like how I guess like assuming how well liked the candidate would be if they'd have a beer with them. They'd be good for like polite conversation.
yeah. Even then, it's
Just
like, well,
Trump being
what
yeah.
kind of beer are you sharing with them? It's like, is it like a Miller Lite or is it some craft beer?
Yeah,
Because
definitely
there's
some
that.
PA, something that tastes like absolute shit, like something pretentious.
Yeah, because then like Obama was the ideal bougie candidate, like you can tell he's college educated.
Yeah,
He doesn't talk like some black guys from the hood.
yeah. But he's a badass though. Like he's pretty gangster with like, and that's why I've heard this like firsthand from. I guess they're still voting for Trump. A couple of guys. Like I talked about, like I play devil's advocate. I just ask people's opinion on like what they like, what they don't like about each presidential candidate running this year. Like some of the Republicans say that like they actually like Harris because she actually imprisoned a lot of guys for marijuana offenses, for apparently. So more of the more racially charged voters, let's say. So I just find that interesting
I
that
mean,
some of them
like
didn't like Harris.
under Bill Clinton, they locked up so many black people.
Yeah, I'm like that's not something you can overlook. And yeah, I've heard some Republican like I guess you can call them like you can get the vibes of racism or racist undertones, but like they kind of like Harris because of that. And I think like that's one thing I'll bring up that I think regardless of who you vote, especially establishment Democrats, I think behind closed doors, they're overall America's way more moderate and way more conservative than people think. I think David Packman mentioned that, and that was one of his criticisms about this is way back in the day. I forgot, probably years ago on some podcast, but he talked about how the Democratic Party is actually more conservative than people think. I guess policy, or maybe it's just something in relation to geopolitics.
Yeah,
You
I
notice
think
how like they'll like both parties will just have their I guess like rage baity talking points of like the border or like abortion or what have you. And then when it comes to war, it's
yeah,
seemingly like everyone is on board with it all of a sudden. Like we have to go to Ukraine, send tens of billions. And I just think it's big business. I'm not logically it makes sense because war is super profitable for America. And
yeah,
the profits don't go to like the Americans, but like the economy as a whole, like it keeps us afloat. And that's another reality we have to accept. So yeah, the fact that the Democrats are cool with war, I think it's just comes down to numbers and money
yeah,
and power. And when I bring that up, I feel like I get blank faces from like hardcore Democrats, like they won't accept that. Like it's always about money and power. Like why else would you subject yourself to politics and have your life public and be attacked by random strangers online? I don't know.
yeah. That's the thing is like there's like seems like there's two kinds of issue. There's the famous talking points issues like the pop culture stuff like abortion or weed, marijuana, or like
Yeah,
LGBT. There's like the kind of stuff that you virtue signal about to the public. And as
yeah,
long as you say all the right things about those things, the public will be completely distracted. Meanwhile, you're just doing business as usual in the back.
yeah. I think I don't know. Like I I I can't speak for the masses. I just wonder if like people would accept that, like you said. It's not even that they're distracted. I feel like deep down they'd be okay with it if you just told them what they wanted to hear, you
Yeah,
know? Because the realities of the world is much more bleak and probably unsavory than most people would like, you know? And I
yeah,
think there's a lot of bad things that happen that people would rather not know or put their blinders on and live in their bubble, honestly.
yeah. But none of this really comes as that much a surprise, I guess, because even in the 1800s, like we tend to have this misconception where it's like, oh, well, rich people supported slavery, poor people were against slavery. That's not really true, because the most ardent abolitionists in the 1800s were usually like northern industrialists and old money types, like from the ones from like New England or old New York.
Right.
They were abolitionists. They were hardcore abolitionists. But at the
Yeah.
same time, they also own factories. And so
Yeah, and like
for them, it's like these blacks, they're gonna leave the South, they're gonna move up to us and work, and just gonna have them work our factories. Meanwhile, you
yeah,
have like some poor redneck in the South who still supports slavery, even though he doesn't have anything to gain by it.
yeah. And that's the thing. Like obviously like we weren't born back then, but I just found it interesting that like we had a civil war and blacks got their freedom, but even up until recently, racism was like a huge thing, you know? And I know leading up to the Civil War, the Northerners had a lot of immigration coming in. That probably diluted like the need for slaves, you know?
Yeah,
And I know the South heavily relied on slavery to, you know, supply their labor. So
yeah.
I don't
And
know if the Northerners did that out of like altruism or they just did that as like a business move, like to like screw over the South and like take over their business because they were deeply involved with like trade in the South too, and they made a lot of money. So
yeah, like one of the arguments that the Southerners made back then was that it's better for blacks to work as slaves, and in return, the white owners would give them clothing, food, and shelter, and have to move up north and work in some slave factory where you're
mm,
just inhaling like soot and smoke and carbon into your lungs, and then
right,
dying in like an industrial accident. And so
yeah,
basically, it was like a fight between rich Northerners and rich Southerners.
yeah, always the rich. And I think that's a historic thing too. Rich people fighting for resources and having conflicts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know you wanted to talk about like how America kind of became woke. You want to like expand on that and like elaborate what you mean?
Well, it kind of ties back to like the video that I made a while, like a couple of days ago. Well, I didn't make it a couple of days ago. I released it a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
But basically, it's like before America came about, before like the Enlightenment, European societies weren't that different from say Asian societies. It was more of a collectivist culture where you have your established traditions and you stick to those traditions. That's all you really knew. Whatever was good enough for your parents, that was good enough for you. But then it's like with the Enlightenment, all of a sudden there's this push for individual value of the individual person. And so now you could actually start challenging institutions of the past. And you could use that mechanism to sort of liberate yourself politically, as well as like religiously, and as well as like use secular science and rationalism to like liberate yourself and like debunk all the superstitions of the past and establish like a new way of living in the future. And in many ways, that kind of inspired, that kind of like started the train rolling towards like postmodernism. This whole idea of like deconstructionism, where we're just dismantling those institutions of the past so that we can liberate people. And so like there's this constant obsession with just liberating people, getting rid of all these stuffy institutions and structures that trap people into like the tyranny of society. We should just liberate people. And so
Right.
over time, that just opened up the groundwork for postmodernism to come in. Because like postmodernism is like unlike classical liberalism, they're not just like cherry picking, oh well, we'll open up this, but we'll keep that closed. The postmodernists will go after everything. They'll
Right.
deconstruct everything. Like
But
they're not just going to deconstruct slavery, they're going to deconstruct Christianity. They're going to deconstruct capitalism.
right. And then gender and all
Yeah,
that uh oppression, what have you.
yeah,
But
that
like we're starting to see already, like it hasn't fully collapsed yet, but so many I guess like factors that historically tied people together, like religion and community and family. Like it's all being undone, and we're already seeing the aftermath of like single parent households and youth not having friends or tight knit communities or support systems, and mental health is at an all time low, even though if you're just looking at statistics, we live in the safest era ever, which is true. But like mental health for the youth is like at its worst, I argue. And then they're not many men are failing to launch, and I just don't think I think like this is a good time to realize we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, and maybe some tradition and some constraints are useful because I know like even in my own life, if I don't have some structure, it's easy for me to just like deteriorate and waste away and not do anything. That's just my personal experience, though.
Yeah, because then like the whole logic behind like critical theory and woke theory, which like followed on the footsteps of postmodernism, was like they believe that all societal institutions are created for the purpose of serving the interest of the people who are in charge. For example, like the idea that stealing is bad, like that's some they would argue like that was invented by rich people to trick poor people into not stealing. When in reality, it's like stealing can actually be good for poor people because then it takes money from the rich and gives it to the poor. But the rich have taught the poor that that's evil, that's immoral, therefore you shouldn't do it. And because the poor don't steal from the rich stay rich while the poor stay poor. And so that
Mm.
serves the interest of the rich against the poor. Like that's like an argument they would make. And they would apply that to like race and gender, sexuality too.
Yeah, I'd have to ask like if they're actually stealing from the rich. Like, are they stealing from a mega corporation? Or are they stealing from like the mom and pop
They
store owner
don't
next to the street?
they don't
Like
go that far.
yeah. See, like if a Target burns down from a riot, even though like I don't think that's good, I think they'll be okay with absorbing the losses because they're a $1 billion company. Not that like I advocate it, but if you're like just going around burning and looting everything in sight and you're just destroying your community, like what are you actually doing? I know that's like a very specific point.
Yeah. It just drives business and economic opportunities out of your neighborhood,
Yeah, yeah.
which makes you
Are
even
you like
poorer.
targeting politicians with like armed security, or are you just like stealing from your neighbor, which you're in the
But
same boat?
but that's the thing is like that doesn't hurt like rich liberals. It only hurts like the normies. But at the same time, advocating for those things makes it look like rich liberals are on the side of the poor.
Yeah, they're not on the side of the poor until they actually like welcome the poor. And I'm not asking, I'm not a radical, but like that's one of my gripes with most of the demographics seem to be like rich, white, liberal women. Like I don't take their words seriously unless they've been through what ethnic poor communities have been through. I feel like they're doing more harm than good a lot of times, just posturing. Because I think like they lack the context of like actually going through an impoverished neighborhood and actually seeing the day-to-day experiences that people will actually go through. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just water cooler talk.
But basically it gives them an opportunity for them to make themselves look good. So they're not like those Republicans who just want to keep money for themselves. You know, like
Right.
they can create the illusion that they support the poor. They were the ones who liberated the slaves.
Yeah. The
They were the
problem is,
ones who overthrew the king, you know?
yeah, like as income inequality gets worse, I feel like like anyone's fair game if we reach civil or political unrest. So I don't think that'll save them if the trajectory we're going is constantly down. Like I don't know if that's their long game or they're just doing that because they're just trying to grab onto any social status they can, you know? Because like you said, like yeah, the French Revolution is like very bloody, and a lot of people got unalived, let's say. So yeah,
Yeah.
unless you're a part of the 1%, I don't think anyone's really safe or anyone's getting out of that situation in one piece.
Yeah. But so far, as long as the rich continue to pretend to help the poor, people aren't going to pick up on that. And so, like, we're not going anywhere.
All right.
Yeah. Any like closing thoughts? before we close out?
I watched a couple more videos. It's more of the financial side of things relating to the same topics. I just think, I don't know, in the future we could talk about like maybe the underclass, which is supposedly a whole different class than just the working class, but the rise of AI and the influx of a lot of people into the Western countries. Um, I think the windows will close for I guess like upward mobility. Like you can still uh I guess level up per se, but I think in the future I think that'll close out if all our jobs are going away, and I
Cool.
think the classes will really solidify at that point.
All right.
But no, that's just what I'm thinking. Like I think in the future, if you're not truly in the 1% where you own all the businesses and have all your investments in the tens of millions, I think a lot of people are just going to be kicked down into we're all going to be in permanently in like the lower class, and the middle class is just going to join the lower class. It'll just be the haves and the have nots if this continues.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. It's like how do you overthrow an oppressor who's very good at making himself look like he's oppressed? Yeah, because they're not like living in castles where you could easily target them. Instead, they're just constantly virtue signaling from their modest upper middle class house in a suburb or condo in New York. Like they have the appearance of being middle class when in reality they're like the ones who are really pulling the levers.
Yeah, it's crazy when because especially the most vocal ones that just play the virtue signal game, and I don't get mad at it, but I think I don't know if that lawyer from I remember when Tim Pool went on Joe Rogan and he debated Jack Dorsey and his lawyer, the Indian chick. I read somewhere that like she makes like seven figures a year working for Twitter, being like the head of their legal department. And it's just like, man, at that point, like everybody has their price. If I feel like a lot of people who advocate for the underprivileged and the poor got a huge payout. I think they just joined the establishment. I really don't think that as virtuous as they are, if they're in that position, they just sell out, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of these people get into these lucrative positions and they just kind of, with the internet, they just parrot the same things that kind of pulls on the heartstrings of people.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who care, but I'm sure there are people who just play the game and really don't care
Yeah. But the
and
thing
know,
is like
yeah,
But the thing is, it seems like if for whatever reason, let's say somehow Trump wins, or somehow the MAGA right wingers move, if somehow they win, and then the public turns in their favor, it's like these very same liberals are going to be like, oh well, I was never one of those radicals. Yeah,
yeah,
and you kind of see like Mark Zuckerberg doing that now, where he's kind of backpedaling.
yeah. That's kind of interesting. Where he's just like, yeah, like he's pushing back, which I thought he turned a new leaf, but looking into it, I'm like, maybe he's just
Who
reading
knows?
the room. Who knows, right? Maybe he is, but like, yeah, I think it is convenient to flip flop, especially when you're kind of adjacent to
Yeah.
politics. You're not really in it, because I feel like if a politician did that, they get dragged.
Yeah, it seems like the whole old money culture, like it's not about following any clear principles. It's just about it's like how do we keep ourselves in the game as long as possible? You know,
Yeah,
it's like keep up with what the current conversations are about. You know, like learn enough to be dangerous. Learn enough so that you can look like you're in with the conversation, but you're not gonna like run afoul and get kicked out and like get your head chopped off or something.
right. Because they
You
want
know,
to preserve their wealth and their way of life as best as possible. And again, that's why I say, like, logically, it makes sense to do that once they've established their wealth.
yeah,
You know,
side with George Bush when it's safe to side with George Bush. side with Obama when it's safe to side with Obama. Play both
Yeah.
sides.
Yeah, just like go full into like call options into Lockheed Martin and like Boeing before the invasion of Iraq and, or whatever, Afghanistan, and then just like cash out once we pull out. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, I read somewhere where like a friend of mine, I don't know, this is again, this is not, I don't want to get like into conspiratorial territory, but before like the attack on Israel last year, there was like a huge stock dump of like Israeli stocks, like before the attack, and it seems so coordinated or so fishy. Like it's just numbers on a chart at the end of the day, but like it just found it so interesting that like stocks just sold off right before the attack. And then obviously like they started recovering. Kind of like COVID, like when the politicians I don't know where I'm going with this, kind of a tangent, but yeah, right before when the COVID lockdowns happened, like all these stocks were sold at the peak. So yeah, I don't
yeah,
know. It's good to have a little bit of healthy skepticism. Like I'm not saying in any absolute like one thing's happening or another, but yeah, I think yeah, that's the problem with a lot of Democrat voters. There are people in positions of power and influence and holding a lot of wealth that want to preserve it too. And I think they have either they have blinders or probably like you said, they just don't even notice that those people exist in their party of choice. Because at least with the Republicans, you know that like you know what they want. They want lower corporate taxes. They want less government involvement in their business, so they can do whatever they want. And I think that's why it's simpler for a lot of people to vote Republican sometimes.
yeah. But then like Republicans don't have a good image because then
They
it's
don't.
like they're openly help the rich
Yeah,
keep their wealth, and that doesn't look good in the eyes of a lot of people.
yeah,
And so like even if they don't like the woke stuff that's going on in Democrats, they're still not going to vote Republican. In many cases, like they'll vote Democrat just despite the Republicans, even though they don't like the Democrats either.
yeah.
So
What
there's
do we
that
do?
issue.
That's a that's a I don't know. People say voting is important, but like given what we've talked about so far, like what do you think what would you do in this situation? Or maybe it doesn't have to be specifically voting for a candidate. Like how would you like move about? Would you
Um, I
in your
think don't be loyal to any party. Just check to see what's most important for you and vote according to that. Just know that you're gonna have to give up some things in order to get other things.
yeah, no one candidate is gonna totally check
Yeah.
all the boxes. They might not even do everything either. A lot of
Yeah.
former Trump voters were upset with Trump that he
Yeah.
wasn't hard enough or radical enough.
Anyways, it's winding down. Less than
All
a minute.
right. It was cool.
Yeah.
Kicking us out yet? It's
Yep.
a long ass 1 minute, but no, that's cool. It was a short one. Maybe we could expand on this